Things perhaps haven't quite gone the way they were intended, despite an eye-popping police cordon which stretches for miles around blocked-off country roads all around this luxury golf resort. A Greenpeace paraglider somehow found a way through last night to within metres of the president. And then this afternoon, President Trump, for the first time on this trip, finally got a look in the whites of the eyes of some of those protesters. But, you know, he does have a fondness for Scotland. His mother was born here, and we think this was the first time that he's gone overseas to another Trump property with all the PR and commercial benefits that brings. Bit of an ethical question that back in the United States. But he did tweet this afternoon something that we can all agree with. He said that the weather is beautiful in Scotland and this place, Turnberry, is incredible. He's leaving tomorrow. It's been an eventful few days.
No Trump, no KKK, no Nazi USA, no Trump!
It was one of the most fortified rounds of golf you'll ever see, on a visit that so far kept the US president far away from his critics.
Donald! Get tweeting quick! Nobody likes you!
Police boats, snipers, a line of officers stretching to the shore at British taxpayers' expense, so that President Trump, son Eric beside him, could enjoy himself now on his own turf. But watch closely. This may just annoy this proud golfer as much as anything on this trip. A missed putt, club swung in frustration, just as the world's press had their cameras out. Then, at last, the moment President Trump, after 2 days evading them, finally face to face with protesters. He waves back as if they're adoring fans. Well, this is the closest that President Trump has come to any protester throughout this entire weekend. He cannot fail now to have heard the message that these people are shouting so clearly towards him.
Oh, I think he gets the message. If he didn't get the message, why is there 700 policemen lining the beach?
He says people love him. He's got great friends in Scotland.
Yes.
People love him.
Unfortunately, he surrounds himself with yes men, and that's why we have an issue. And he says nobody to tell him no.
The private Scottish leg of this visit began at Prestwick Airport last night. He was met by Scottish Secretary David Mundell and not by First Minister Nicola Sturgeon, with whom he has some history.
Well, this is a UK government hosted visit, and it was the choice of the UK government, as I understand it, that David Mundell went to Prestwick Airport to greet the President, and I have no issue with that at all. But, you know, it's important, I think, that the President is here in Scotland. I hope he has a good visit to Scotland, but it's important that we all get the chance to have our say, and I hope the President is also listening.
Later, at his 5-star Turnberry resort, Donald Trump was met by an uninvited guest. A Greenpeace activist paraglided beyond police defences to within yards of the President. Well below par, read the banner, as President Trump ducked inside. After London yesterday, Edinburgh's turn today, blimp and all. Liam Fox, International Trade Secretary, said earlier protesters have embarrassed themselves and don't reflect the good manners of the British people. President Trump has not had it all his own way on this trip. Even that round of golf he was so looking forward to, disturbed by protesters who finally caught up with him.
Well, joining me now in the studio is John Nicholson, formerly a speechwriter for a US senator before serving as the SNP's culture, media and sports spokesperson. Greg Swenson from Republicans Overseas, and American comedian and activist Athena Stevens. Welcome to you all. Let me start with you, Greg. Liam Fox, International Trade Secretary, just said, and as we heard in Kieran's piece, that the demonstrators have embarrassed Britain and themselves by demonstrating the way they did. Do you agree with that?
Well, I think so. Look, I'm thrilled that they exercised their right to free speech and their right to protest. It's fantastic. But a lot of times the left just goes a little bit off the rails, and it usually fails.
But it was a peaceful protest.
Yeah, I mean,
there was a balloon involved,
look,
but it didn't pop in anyone's face.
As it turns out, it was relatively. I think everybody got out unscathed. Everything worked out well. But if I were a strategist for the Democrats in the U.S. or Labor here, I would say, have the argument, make the case, have a peaceful protest, that's fine. But when they go a little bit off the rails with the silliness, and this happens in the States as well, they usually lose.
But what I'm interested in is, I suspect that Trump quite likes the demonstrators. The old Oscar Wilde thing, there's one thing worse than being, talked about nastily is not being talked about. But also when he goes to a rally, and I've been to plenty of his rallies, he's incredibly vocal and nasty about people like us, the press.
But he's not funny.
And
Never
he's not funny.
And he hates people laughing at him. And that's why the Trump baby thing was so effective. What is funnier than a giant inflatable Trump wearing nappies and a tiny hands clasping a phone? He hates that. You can imagine his fury when
Do you
he
think
sees
that's
it.
right, Athena? I mean, you're a comedian. Is there anything funny about Trump? Or is it all too serious to laugh at?
Well, that's a loaded question in the one. But I think, first of all, this is a march led by women. With the Women's March. And I think, is it up to the layperson to be diplomatic? That's the first question we have to ask. And when citizens feel like they are not being represented, they are going to fight back. And that's why we see parties like the Women's Equality Party springing up, because these old world politicians are not representing the people.
And do you feel that he represents you as an American president?
Well, he is my employee. Let's
He's your
make
employee,
that
yeah.
clear.
Very good point. Very good
I
point.
pay his taxes. So is he doing a good job? I don't think so personally, but there are things like the stock market is at an all-time high.
Yeah.
Liberals need to look at that honestly and figure out how to respond to that constructively.
Well, let's ask John here. I mean, you're a critic of Trump, but, stock market's doing fine. The world hasn't ended. He's met the North Korean leader. Okay, there's a lot of follow-up that hasn't happened yet. I mean, unemployment is at an historic low. If you're an American, you can understand why people rather like him over there.
Not really. I can't understand that at all. He's a misogynist. He's a racist. He's a homophobe. He's a thoroughly unpleasant character. And I think the mistake that Theresa May made was not to raise any of these things in public, because I think we're all waiting to cheer her on. If instead of, in that pathetic way, she said, where he'd just gone on one of his long rants about how he loved her, having just targeted her in the sun, she leaned forward and said, and we are friends. And the country collectively cringed for her.
Okay, as a Republican, did you cringe? I mean, you talked about the demonstrator. Did you cringe at the way that he talked about his host into the sun?
We've had so many cringeworthy moments in the last, not just the last year and a half, but even during the campaign. So look, conservatives have had a really tough time.
That's not very Republican of you to say.
So, I mean, look, I think there's a whole branch of Republicans. There's 3 or 4 categories right now. There's the crazy Trumpers. There's the never Trumpers. There's the kind of.
And where do you belong?
I'm in the 4th group, which is I criticize him when he does something that's obnoxious, and I support him when he does something that is good. There's many times where it's there's cringeworthy moments. I'm not embarrassed by him.
He's just so rude, isn't he?
I think
No, he's just so
also
rude.
I think you're right. He's
On
rude.
and on about the special relationship.
The special relationship.
That Britain is supposed to have with America. What I would like to see as a spokesperson of the WEB is Theresa May set the agenda and not follow him around like a codependent relationship. Any relationship has to be built on equality and trust. We do not have that here.
I think that's such a good point, because when you front-load a discussion with a special relationship, and these are the words that every prime minister wants to hear from the lips of an American president.
It's pathetic.
Yeah. Well, also, it may be that, but also, you're making it more difficult to come up with a trade relationship, aren't you?
Well,
because he's not going to be nice to us.
No, but he's not nice to anybody, really. I mean, he's let's just
It's
say
nice to Kim.
He
loves dictators.
Right.
Wow.
I mean, look, there's an argument to keep your friends close and your enemies closer. So he's got this method of throwing a grenade in the room, backpedaling the next day, trying to patch things up. I'm not really sure he's got an end game. look, to say he's disruptive is an understatement. He's rude, he's boorish, all that. But don't let that drive you crazy.
But even Maggie Thatcher did a better job managing her friend Reagan than what we are seeing.
It's true. It's true. When we look at this weekend, what do we see? We see him belittling the Prime Minister. We see him pursue his obsession with the Muslim mayor of London. We see him being incredibly discourteous to the Queen, walking in front.
Well, I think that's perhaps a little bit unfair. I mean,
that's his body language. You watched him with his wife. He walks in front of his wife. He's just. He's a boor.
Let's give him a pass.
He's a boor. Do you know the country that I want to see? The country I want to see is what we've seen today. We've seen marches all across the country, but today the First Minister of Scotland is leading a gay pride march. That's what I want to see. Those liberal values being triumphed by our leaders.
I can't let you get off the hook because the SNP courted him. Alex Salmond courted Trump and his money for years, and then they fell out rather spectacularly.
It was, of course, the Labour Party that made him trade ambassador, which is something that you may have forgotten. And it was Nicola Sturgeon, who's leading the Gay Pride March today, who dropped him as the trade ambassador.
But Scotland has had a rather complex relationship with Trump, hasn't it? And it hasn't always been this
Before
negative.
he was a politician, he was a businessman. And of course, people want jobs. And every leader wants to court businessmen who they think will provide jobs.
OK. Greg, I just want to ask you, I mean, here he is on this sort of, roadshow through Europe. It'll end up in Helsinki on Monday. There is a genuine fear that this man is tearing apart the Western alliances and the values that have kept us peaceful and prosperous since the Second World War. What do you think?
I think that's exaggerating. Look, he's got very, very bad manners. He, as I said earlier, he throws a grenade in the room. He doesn't do things in the traditional way.
But does he believe in NATO? Does he believe in the EU? Does he believe in the Western alliance?
Look, I think what everybody has to get used to is he's going to do obnoxious things, but he doesn't really have a powerful governing philosophy. He's done some very good things for conservatives in the last 18 months. But no, doing all this, I wouldn't speculate too much on what he's going to do.
We've run out of time. Got to leave it there. Athena, Greg, John, thank you very much.
Thanks, Matt.
Thank you.